Mr. Brian Patrick O'Malley. Thank you so much for joining us, and obviously thank you for making this show happen, because it's all your creative baby, as it were, and it's been an honor working with you and putting this together. And I'm really glad that we've got people watching and who are enjoying this and coming back weekly and enjoying the content that we've created. So first of all, from me, thank you so much for sort of making this happen, and from the entire of the acting industry and up and coming talents, on behalf of everybody, we thank you all so much, because honestly, your support is unwavering and you never want for anything. And you're one of the kindest souls I think a lot of us have ever met. So thank you.
Thank
And
you.
welcome. So I thought we'd talk about today, one, your involvement with the industry and the up and coming talents that you so kindly sort of support, and also the producing side that you've also found gone into in the last few years. So what was it that led you to sort of seek out new up and coming talent and just show that support? Because it must be a conscious decision to go and show that support and find these people on Twitter, Instagram, from short film festivals, wherever you sort of find people and hear about people.
Well, thank you. I first sort of was scouting the talent because I had in mind a project that never got off the ground, as often happens in filmmaking. But it was a project where I was looking for actors, British actors. I wanted that kind of authenticity, um, who could do certain British accents, and it would be a plus for the project I had in mind, sort of a historical drama, if they had stage combat training. And one now in the US, we have IMDb, and if you have the pro version, you can see resumes and skill sets. You guys have that set up with Spotlight,
Mm.
where you can, you've got the list of accents. An actor can do the list of skills they're trained in and all of that, as well as their actual credits. And so I was able to find exactly, the skill set I was looking for. So followed that set of talent, um, realized there was an opportunity to show support for people before I had really a script or a project to present them. I just, as sort of a courtesy, maybe I'm just trying to ingratiate myself with people I hope to work with. But you can construct a tweet highlighting, great things from somebody's resume, that looks like a press release. And it turns out, I was grateful that actors don't seem to mind that. And, some of them like it enough to share the message because, I consider it a talent when even if jokingly an actor says, I should get you to write some of my publicity. I'm like, okay, there already was, but okay. But no, feel free to, yeah. So that I take that as a very high compliment. And so I and the support that the actors have given back anytime I undertake like a writing project or have something in the works, their support has been monumental. And it really, as we're all learning, especially now, I have been lucky that the job I had, my day job, wasn't affected by the lockdown, which just
Right.
is the nature of the job. Um, so I'm not taking the full hit that so many other people are, but we are learning that just having that kind of support and people who are concerned about your work and your well-being is just a great thing to have. So I'm glad to promote actors, and I'm very grateful for the support they've shown me. It's in fact, it was actors who got me writing again after a few years of being out of it. That's the only reason I had was I'll give credit to Ryan Mann, who liked the script idea I had, and that prompted me to think, well, maybe the other ideas I've been sitting on have been worthwhile. If he liked that one, maybe these other ones have merit. So it wound up getting me published when I reopened those and started reinvestigating, article ideas I had. So the actors have really gotten me back in the saddle as far as writing goes. I owe them a lot.
You also produce, and you've supported where you can with up and coming films, and obviously supporting this channel as well. And do you think that was a byproduct of the writing, or did you set out to produce?
Well, it was partly, yeah, it was an offshoot of that, and it was an extension of showing support. As soon as an actor that I'm a huge fan of is involved in a project, I do what I can to promote their fundraiser. If my budget permits, throw a few pennies in the hat. And but it's basically that kind of goodwill that a lot of like the executive producer credits are not from me, being on the set or having any kind of, I don't have any hand in the creation of the work. I've just shown support. So part of those credits is offset support. And then some of them, like in the show, it was, thanks by the way, it was minimal work on my part. As you know, the production value went up when it was no longer in my hands and it was in yours. Yeah, it was an extension of showing support. And that's what I had the idea for. Well, of course, the chat show format's just been around for ages. But the idea for this show was just to build networks for upcoming actors. So that the show was sort of an extension of that, trying to build networks of, between the actors that I admire. And of course, Jack Sharkey came in, he had a number of people like Jason Fares was already a friend of, I knew of Jack Sharkey's work through a tour they did together with the Groundlings, a Shakespearean tour, just a few months before COVID. And he had a number with the set producer who was the first guest. Jessica Wood was a contact that Jack already had. And of course, the majority of everybody that has all been contacts you brought to the show. So I've added very little in that regard, but hopefully, around the corner we'll be booking people who are mutual acquaintances. And,
absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of the extension of that, was trying to show support.
So we'll actually link back to your writing. I actually didn't know you had several sort of projects, whether they're still up and coming. Is there any that you can, or feel free to say no? Is there any that you can share about, even just the plot lines of a few of your creations?
Sure. Well, a number of the things that I write about are the kind of things I'd like to see, little historical documentary, and they could be pitched as educational programs if you went with like a strictly academic sort of retelling of things. It could be pitched to, educational television, or it could be put on the film circuit to see if anybody shows interest there. But it is mostly historical. Some of my writing is about war crimes during the American Revolution. Is kind of, I got into that trying to get people to be more sympathetic to people who are currently in U.S. custody. That,
okay.
So because the illegal combatant legal category is essentially the rebel category that American revolutionaries were in. It's the same justification for saying, well, if these people have no rights, we don't have to worry about how they're treated. Well, that led to a whole array of misconduct during that war. Something, it's weird the number of parallels. Church desecrations, as far as insulting the way people like to some people like to denigrate Islam and say it was simply understood that there was a level of religious fanaticism that was involved in the American Revolution, and American religion was sort of vilified, and it's just weird with the parallels that exist, but they're kind of. So unfortunately, what I've done is I've been looking for actors. I sort of screened for people who were great and would be wonderful people to work with. But then you also have to break it to these really nice people that you're asking them to play villains. God, I've never really crossed that bridge yet where I have to, hey, you'd be great to work with. I'm going to ask you to play an awful person. So I haven't figured out how I'm going to make that transition. But
I honestly, and I think I can speak for a lot of actors out there, I don't think you need to worry about that. A lot of people will jump at the chance to play villains. And certainly anyone who has been not necessarily typecast, but playing the good guy for so long, playing a villain is refreshing. I think is the so yeah. Do not worry about that. I can promise you, you'll have plenty of support for actors that want to show their dark side. War Crimes sort of started it, and obviously you've got a lot of short documentaries. Is perhaps the best way of writing it. Which we'll get onto in another episode of the show, where we'll have another presenter with us as well, and we'll really dive into your work a bit more. But I wanted to focus on today's episode about your work with actors and the sort of producing side. So, but yeah, still staying on your writing for a little bit. I'm sure that actually then led into your novel, which is available on Amazon, whether you're in the UK or US. It is now available in the UK. It wasn't for a while, but it is now, so you can order your copy. What was the progression to getting to writing this? Was it through the war crimes that you ended up?
That war crime research from 200-year-old war crimes, and looking to a television presenter I often disagree with, using historical sources to say that the positions he's defending, basically the positions of a certain outgoing, fingers crossed, administration, wasn't really a good way to pitch things. My position was that that the founders, key members of them, like James Madison, who was basically the architect of the Constitution, who was extremely obsessed with the idea that you can only really have a free country if there's incredible diversity in it. And he believed that in the case of religion. He thought if there's one denomination or religion that's just an overwhelming majority, it sets up a whole mindset where everybody agrees with you, so you just assume that your agenda is right. Whereas if you're one of, dozens of religions, you kind of have to negotiate your place in the public sphere, and you really do see that in a lot of history when I tried to find examples to prove this, because Tucker Carlson was trying to dismiss the idea of diversity. Well, it's just a bumper sticker slogan. Nobody explains why this is a good thing. And it turns out there's plenty of arguments for it. And one thing I thought was particularly telling was in Jewish history, Jews have always been safer in countries where they're not the only minority. Medieval Poland was sort of ideal for this. A huge country where basically Lithuania and Poland were one country. So you already had two major ethnic groups with two different languages. And like a lot of Eastern Europe, it had towns that were a network of German towns that were part of the trade route. So you had Germans, you had Lithuanians, Poles, You had Muslim Tartars. You had some people like Ukrainians who were Orthodox, and then you had the majority that was Catholic. That you had a lot. But as one historian said, Poles weren't even a majority in Poland.
Right.
They were just one of many ethnic groups there. And it was in that one of the best places to be for Jews for hundreds of years until the obvious change in 1939. The best place to be was in a country that had so much diversity that you didn't stand out for being different.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you look at the Middle East, the two hardest places that Jews had it were the places where they were the only non-Muslim local minority.
Right.
And Morocco at one end in the west, and then more towards the heartland on the peninsula was in Yemen. And they were the only local, I say Morocco's kind of sketchy because they did have Christians who were brought in as servants and stuff, but the only local non-Muslim group and you just stand out when you're the only minority. And I think anybody who's been the only Asian student in a small town that's like 98% white, or the only Protestant family in a Catholic county in Ireland, anybody who's been in that kind of situation knows how weird it is to be the only one of your kind.
Yeah.
And so it comes with a whole different, there are very strong arguments for diversity and why it's a great thing. And so I tried to establish, that was a majority of that book, was trying to establish that.
So I want to head back to way before even you and I met. And did you, well, right back to the start, really. As I always ask the actors who come on, is where did it all begin? And I think that'd be, well, I'd love to know, where for you did, not even necessarily writing, but where did the love of the arts, whether it's writing or getting involved in producing, when did it all begin for you? Did you write from a young age, or?
Yeah, I was like a lot of kids. I drew, illustrated as a kid, seemed to have a little bit of tiny speck of talent there. And I came from a family that loved stories. My mom was always telling us stories about old time Hollywood. My grandfather was a cop who on the side wrote poetry.
Right.
My mom was a real estate agent who on the side wrote some poetry. So there's always been this love of storytelling, and it was always an acceptable thing, the idea of writing, and the value of trying to tell a good joke. Not everyone's a hit. Not every joke is a hit, but so there was always an encouragement for that kind of creativity. And so my interest, when I had an interest in history, developed that. It became a quest for finding and sharing good stories. And I guess the trick is when you're doing it with history is you try to take an exciting story and not make it insufferably dull. Your job is to present it as well as it deserves, and try to remember that, you have to have the credibility of all the, prove what you want to argue in a footnote, but you also have to remember it's about telling a story and telling it well, which I can't claim that I do, but that's my objective.
I'm not going to ask you to do it on the spot, as I didn't prepare you for this. But do you? You clearly have a long history of poetry in the family. Do you write it yourself?
I didn't catch that.
I am sorry, that's silly. Do you write poetry as well? Have you continued the tradition?
Once in a blue moon, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have like a whole book of it, but I got a few poems.
Certainly, there's been a lot of. I find poetry has become a lot more mainstream this year. I think a lot of people have grown in themselves this year and spent a lot of time in reflection. And I think a lot of reflection seems to lead to poetry. And there's a lot of people, certainly in my life, I know, who have spent a lot of this year creating poetry and finding poetry as a fantastic sort of outlet for their emotions.
Right. I think a lot of people are finding it very therapeutic now.
Mm,
There's a lot of emotion to work through.
yeah.
But yeah, so my first novel, which is nowhere near completion or anything, but it was a project I started as a teenager, and that is, if we talk about being on the back burner, that would certainly qualify.
Sure.
And I'm still interested in those characters and telling that story. It's a weird one, but aside from the history part, that's an entirely fictional. I say entirely, but like
Mm,
anything, you rip off from either a story in the news or some overheard remark in a conversation or something. You hope you're not stealing too much to wind up in a lawsuit, but that kind of inspiration does exist.
mm,
But yeah, that project has been sitting on the back burner. Um, but a tale of religious fanaticism and basically a story about a cult. Eh, Pretty much anything that articles or things that I've published recently are all reiterations of things I've been toying with for several years.
mm,
And if they get published, which luckily some of them have, that's really just been a function of me finding a new source that makes a certain claim stronger, or finding a new angle of telling something. Or what's also pretty important in storytelling is realizing there's a part of something of the story that you were really attached to, but it's not going to sell. It's
yeah.
not going to be the book you think it is. And there were some things that I set out to try to prove,
Mm,
which I since learned were like I tried to identify the author of something that was written under a pseudonym. I've since found out through somebody else's writing that the likely author of it, but I realized that wasn't the main story. The main story was some other thing. And sometimes you do have to give up on one aspect of the story to find the real meat of it
yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that helps any potential writers out there. Sometimes you do have to let one thing go to really find what you were supposed to be on anyway, the path you were supposed to be on. But between that and I think it's a great thing, and where you start on one project and you suddenly have inspiration for another. I That has been my tip when somebody asks about writing. I don't claim to have too much good advice. Is that it sometimes is good to have two different projects that you're working on. So when you hit a brick wall on one, you
Mm,
can turn to the other. And in the back of your mind, there's, some part of you is still trying to resolve that, but you're keeping yourself distracted with this other story that's sort of maybe not related at all,
mm,
but it gives you something to work on while the cobbler in the back of your mind is still trying to, spin that Rubik's Cube, and then you'll suddenly get an inspiration for it, the other project, and you can kind of bounce back and forth. And eventually one of them will probably get done, maybe
yeah.
both.
Yeah.
So I, so I think that's the best way to go about it, is to have
Mm,
maybe not 100 different projects at once. Some people are capable of that, but two or three might be good for you.
mm. And on the I guess the subject of writing, do you have? I mean, that's some fantastic advice, and I really hope people will pick up on that, because I'm certainly taking stuff away from that myself, because that's fantastic insight. Do you have, as a writer, kind of a set routine that you do, or do you have a procedure that you kind of, or a routine where you sit down and then you're ready to write, or is it as and when it comes along?
I've always tried to cultivate that habit. I mean, set aside so many hours a day, at least an hour a day, or something. I've never really had the discipline. And of course, um, people said, well, that's why you haven't produced like entire books yet, just several articles. But the I you do try to follow any any kind of advice you can get out there can be good and find out which one works best for you. And one person's golden rule on writing might be exactly what is a pain for you, but you'll find other advice that's good. Stephen King's essay on writing, and he goes, and this is truer for fiction probably, was don't start with an outline, just write and see what happens. Then you have other people who are like, I want the full story mapped out, start to finish before I write the first sentence. And the truth is that it all comes down to, well, which one is really going to work for you?
Yeah, yeah.
Because obviously that method has worked pretty wonderfully for King. So, yeah. And it will work for somebody else. Many people have, and other people have produced really great work, very marketable work with their outlines and their, all of that stuff. So it's about finding what works for you and then just kind of putting the advice on a scale.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm addicted to caffeine, so I probably always will have a soda beside me. That for a routine, that's going to be in there. And I'm not recommending that because, like, recommending a drug, I mean, it's an addictive substance. But yeah, so my ritual involves that caffeine addiction, and then the kind of usual advice they kind of give you: don't necessarily be near a window where something's happening, hide your phone, that kind of stuff. I toyed with the idea of like creating a channel, whether it's whatever streaming service, Pandora or whatever you might be using, where you pick music to have in the background. I don't know that always works. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. My thing is just you do have to have some goals that are attainable, like maybe a few pages a day. And you can try to drive yourself to, I want to get a whole chapter done in one day. And what you find is that you're going to be behind on that first day. You're going to enter the second day with a deficit. Don't set such big goals that all you're doing is setting yourself up to be demoralized.
Yeah.
Give yourself a very small, attainable goal. If you overshoot it, throw a party. You wanted to do 3 pages. I got 4. Call everybody you know. Break open a thing of champagne. That's a little much, but something like that. Keep your objectives obtainable and doable. Would have to be my top bit of advice.
I was actually going to ask you for advice to up and coming actors, but I think you've given 3 or 4 fantastic pointers there. And it's right, because it's very easy to be demoralized if you've not reached that point. I think it's exactly like the acting world is, in the sense of it's very much a toolkit. As you said, you've got Stephen King, who preferred to write and see what came out naturally, where other people preferred to have that structure. But yeah, so any sort of up and coming writers, people considering picking up the pen, you've just had some incredible advice from Brian there, and so I'd certainly write that down. But thank you, Brian, so much for coming on today, and we're going to have you on at some point either in the new year or later this year to talk about some of your other publications where we bit of a darker tone, which is why I've left it out for for this show, as it does go into some of the darker sides of war and some of the darker times of history. But we have all that to look forward to and more. But again, thank you so, Brian. And again, thank you from everyone who hope you will watch this, and I'm sure will agree with me tenfold. Everyone out there, stay safe and stay creative, and we will see you next time.